Aloha, everybody, and welcome to today's National Health Federation interview. It's Wednesday, 4 p.m. here in Florida, and I am elated to interview an esteemed NHF member and contributing Health Freedom News author, Catherine Austin Fitz. For those who don't already know, Catherine offers Solari Report subscribers a unique perspective on how to navigate the opportunities and risks in the global financial system and political economy. Catherine is the president of Solari Inc., publisher of the Solari Report, and managing member of Solari Investment Advisory Services, LLC. Catherine served as managing director and member of the board of directors of the Wall Street investment bank, Dillon Reed & Company, Incorporated, as Assistant Secretary of Housing and Federal Housing Commissioner at the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development in the first Bush administration, and was president of Hamilton Securities Group, Incorporated. Catherine has designed and closed over 25 billion of transactions and investments to date, and led portfolio and investment strategy for 300 billion of financial assets and liabilities. Catherine graduated from the University of Pennsylvania, the Wharton School, and studied Mandarin Chinese at the Chinese University of Hong Kong. She blogs for the Solari Report at solari.com. The 2020 Solari vision is inspiring and helping as many people as possible to live a free and inspired life, especially with actionable intelligence. Thank you again very much, Catherine, for your time today and sharing your knowledge with our audience and members.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure. You know, I've been a very faithful NHF member for quite a while, and you're an organization that I not only enjoy because I love the magazine, but I am so impressed by what you accomplish. It's, you know, I always feel whenever I write a check to NHF that I'm getting a lot of bang for my buck.
Thank you. And you've been a member for a little bit over a decade?
Yeah, I can't remember. I think I joined in 2008, 2009, but certainly more than a decade.
Wow. Well, what would you say, what do you love most about being an NHF member?
Well, it was very interesting. What happened to me was I was a very successful investment banker, and I had my own company in Washington. I ended up in serious litigation with the Department of Justice. And to win the litigation, I had to go public. So I had to, you know, I'd grown up in a world where you only talk to 20 people at the jockey club or the 21 club or on the trading floor. You didn't generally talk about money. And I found myself suddenly having to be on the radio talking to millions of people about money. It was very sort of major transition for me. And as a result, when I settled the litigation in 2006, I had made a command decision because I had so much frightening experience with the corruption of the corporate media that I decided if people ask me questions, I'm going to talk to people directly. I won't talk to the corporate media. I'll just email back and forth. Well, I ended up with thousands of people all around the world who were constantly emailing me, asking me questions. And one thing led to another, and I realized, oh, you know, what everybody wants is investment advice. So I started an investment advisory company. And I started to help literally hundreds of families with their financial planning and their investments. And you know what I discovered? The number one cause of people losing their financial wealth was health and medical, and really fake science, if you will. And so if you wanted a family to be healthy, it was absolutely critical that they become literate in health and that they enjoy health freedoms, that they know how to navigate the health industry, but they really had to take control and take responsibility for their health. And so I started to look for different organizations who were both working for health freedom, but also making sure people had the best information on health and how to take care of their health. And that led me to Scott Tips and National Health Freedom. So what I realized was that that one of the most important things people could do for their health is not worry about their brokerage account. They needed to worry about how they were going to take responsibility to really be their own doctor. I'm not saying you don't use doctors or healthcare practitioners, but you can't afford in this environment to not be highly literate about how to manage your health, take care of your health, and interact with the medical and health industries.
Wow. And the Hippocrates quote is coming to my mind right now, where he said, he was the father of Western medicine. If you are not your own doctor, you are a fool, you know? And you know, so I'll just leave it at that, because obviously I greatly respect you know, critical care and things like that. But when we start talking about prevention, I think that's what.
Well, one of the things I've discovered, because I've had a lot of doctors as clients, one of the things I discovered was that really great doctors love having very intelligent, engaged clients who take responsibility, or I should say patients. So, you know, the great doctors have high learning speeds, and they enjoy having patients who share that learning with them.
Well, not only have you been a member for approximately 12 years, you're also a contributing author. So I recently read, for our NHF members, you made an article, you were actually on the cover in winter 2016. And your article was about suppression, and it was somewhat focused on big pharma or vaccines.
Well, the thing that astonished me, when after working, many of the families that came to me had very horrible experiences with healthcare. And as they discovered the lies and the fake science, they would say, you know, if it's this bad in healthcare, what's it like in finance? And that would lead to their finding me. But as a result, I started to really research the extraordinary things happening in the vaccine world and some of the other practices that were killing people or disabling them. We have an absolute epidemic of chronic disease in the United States. So 54% of American children have chronic disease. And when you talk to pediatricians, they'll tell you that it's really much higher, that there's so many kids with chronic disease, but who can't afford to be tested properly. So some of, you know, I just had one pediatrician tell me she thought it was higher than 70%. I mean, I call it the great poisoning. And so it inspired me to dig in and start to learn about what was happening and why. And when you discover the profound extent of the lies, I thought the lies in finance were the worst thing I'd ever seen. And then I discovered, no, the lies in sort of health and fake science are truly, they're the worst thing I've ever seen.
Wow.
And it's extraordinary because, you know, it was very hard for me to believe this. I was a partner at a Wall Street firm. I went to Washington. I was very successful. I just couldn't believe that the lies could be that great and me not know. And really, when you dive in and you look, vaccines is the perfect example. But my experience on the financial side was when one group of people, and I'm going to grossly oversimplify, we have one group of people in our society who can print money and borrow for 0%, whereas everybody else is spending, you know, the average credit card interest rate is 15.99%, so 16%. So if you can borrow at 0% and I have to pay 16% to borrow, guess who's going to end up owning everything, right? Right. So what I've discovered is when one group can literally print money or steal as much money as they want, they can buy a lot of lies and a lot of people willing to tell lies.
And I'm sure you've thought about the connection. You know, if people are somewhat sick or they're not at optimal health, it's not that easy to kind of figure this all out. Because
if you were in the best health in the world, it's not easy to figure out. You know, and it takes a huge amount of time. If you're sick, it's much more difficult because the information is highly complex.
And it also ties in to finance because a customer cured is a customer lost. So,
well, it's astonishing. I don't know if you've seen Vax 2.
I have.
We had Polly Tommy on the Solari Report, and She is an amazing, she was a mom. She was a very successful actress and entertainer, and she had a child who had vaccine injury, and she was a committed believer in vaccination. Anyway, so she and a group of people did a documentary Vax, and it was focused on the MMR vaccine. And then they took the documentary on the road screening it. They bought a bus, and as they went from place to place, they started interviewing doctors and parents and vaccine injured kids. And all of a sudden, all these people started showing up who had never had any vaccinations. So families of people, many of them were families who'd experienced a vaccine injury and then they didn't vaccinate their other kids. So the oldest kid got vaccinated, had a vaccine injury, and then they didn't. So they started to have all these kids show up that were not vaccinated. And when you see the unbelievable stories of health and the difference, but what I started to do as I was watching Vax2 is I started to calculate out for each child and each family how much the pharmaceutical companies made on the chronic diseases. And it's absolutely frightening. So if you can vaccinate a child in a way that makes them chronically diseased, your profits are fantastic.
What can
So,
we?
so let's back up. What those are the profits of suppression. Secrecy and suppression of information is a huge profit maker.
Well, what I'm thinking, what do you recommend? Like, what can we do? Like, let's say, for example, the CDC is actually a vaccine manufacturing company. Like, what do we do about it?
So here's what we can do. And I love to start off with the big picture. And I know we share a lot of feelings about the big picture. So to me, the universe is intelligent. To me, the basis of life is, whether you want to call it light, intelligence, love, but the universe is intelligent and the universe is abundant. And you need to start there and understand that our world is both spiritual and energetic as well as physical. So first you need to break out of the materialist model. You need to break out of hyper-materialism because it's going to lock you into a very limited, scarce world. So the first thing is to understand the universe is intelligent, and as I would say, there's almost always a solution. But as a practical matter, say there's always a way, there's always a solution. But it's your responsibility to learn, to find, to create. So for example, when I litigated in very extreme litigation for 11 years. And the nature of my circumstances, I couldn't go to the hospital. I couldn't go to the doctor. So whenever I got sick, I would sit down and I would pray. And I would pray and I would pray until the answer came. And sometimes the answer just came to me in prayer. Sometimes, a DVD would show up, or suddenly I'd hear a radio show that would teach me what the solution was. But the answers would always come. And what I will tell you is I'm much healthier today because I couldn't go to the doctor and I couldn't go to the hospital. I had to learn how to, in the first instance, take responsibility to determine what was wrong. A lot of times what was wrong was energetic. It wasn't physical. And you can't solve an energetic problem with a physical solution. So many is the time in our society, you'll see people try and achieve a financial solution to a political problem. There's no such thing. So a lot of times solving problems requires, we need to stop, sit down, slow down, and really think. Because for the most part, the answers are inside ourselves. Mm-hmm. And if you don't have that process happening when you access doctors or medicine, you can get yourself in a whole lot of trouble. So a lot of it was learning for me to take responsibility.
Personal responsibility. I guess what I'm saying, and this ties into the Federal Reserve, because I'm a big believer, National Health Federation does not, necessarily support what I'm about to say, but the idea of abolishing the Fed. So also the idea of like abolishing the CDC, because
Okay, so be careful, because
probably auditing first, doing an audit.
I'm a great believer. An audit of the Federal Reserve would be fantastic. An audit of the U.S. Treasury would be fantastic. We've never had that. Okay, so, and the two are joined at the hip. They're like Siamese twins, so you can't audit one without auditing the other. It's, it's like the Pillsbury Doughboy. You don't want the problems to squeeze over the other side. Well, they're auditing one and not the other. Mm-hmm. But the financial system is a distinct part of the governance structure. Okay, so you cannot re-engineer or change the financial system without understanding what that means to the governance structure. And if you look at all of our financial problems, they reflect not financial problems, but they reflect a governance problem. We have a governance system which is invisible and secret. It's running the financial system on an invisible and secret basis. And we know it's doing a tremendous number of things which are extremely harmful to the human race or inhuman. And so we don't have a financial problem, we have a governance problem. And if you tinker with financial reform without understanding whether it makes your governance problem worse or better, you are easily committing suicide.
Well, that's a great point. And what I would also like to say is, from a biological perspective, there's the idea that if we have a petri dish of cells and we have like toxins on one side, the cells will go away from it.
Right.
Another petri dish and you have nutrients, cells go towards it. So what this explains is that, biologically speaking, if we're trying to protect, we're like in defense, survival. So when we start looking at the structures of government, what is CDC? Disease control, that prevent, it's not really about like health promotion. And this is also something that I've realized with like the Environmental Protection Agency, and kind of the realization of how it's, been lobbied by some of the biggest polluters on the planet, or, I call them the biotech cartel. So there's kind of that shift in perspective to realize, like, what if we had the Environmental Health Promotion Agency? It's like a different energy. And same thing with CDC, like the difference between like center.
So I'll tell you why we don't.
So thank you for letting me explain it, but that's what I also meant. And if anything, before just abolishing some type of auditing, because it's taking that, what you're saying about responsibility, to a cultural scale, collective scale.
So here's why I said that, because what you will discover is what is often marketed to young people is, let's reform it. And it's always coming from the top, but basically the central bankers are encouraging young people to lead real reform, and it's a reform that's going to centralize more power, and they don't realize it. Do you see what I mean?
Public banking. I've looked into this, and I think this ties into the article you wrote for Health Freedom.
Right. So it's really important when you look at a reform. First of all, you have to say, what is the real problem? So, for example, if you look at vaccines, heavy schedules of vaccines are not the problem. The problem is we have a governance system in a pharmaceutical industry who thinks it's a great idea to poison us. That's the problem. And that's the problem you need to fix, because otherwise, whatever comes through that pipeline is not going to be trustworthy. You can't reform the vaccine problem at the vaccine level, because you're going to leave the corrupt governance in place. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, I do.
But you always need to ask the question on any reform, is this going to centralize power, or is this going to decentralize power? Okay, and be very careful, because many of the financial reforms that are being promoted are designed to centralize political power, and they don't look like that on the first blush.
See,
the Solari Report exists to make sure, my goal is to make sure you have the actionable intelligence you need so that whether you're operating and getting what you want in your individual life or contributing to the greater whole, that you have a map that will help you get what you want. In other words, you can't be, I'm trying to make you immune to trickery. Does that make sense?
Well, that's the idea. If our intelligence is
Right.
high enough, we can't be deceived or we can't be duped, because
Right.
we're
Right.
onto it. The trickery you mentioned.
Right. And it's very important. One of the things you'll find is being immune to trickery requires teamwork. So, for example, I'll tell you, one of the things I learned being an investment advisor, and I've stopped being an investment advisor, so I know I do screens now, but I no longer have clients. Anyway, but one of the things I discovered was that a lot of my first clients were couples who disagreed. The men, there was a man and a woman, and they couldn't agree, and so they, I was the guy who was going to help figure it out.
The therapist.
And one of the things I discovered in the process, well, because I spoke both languages, the one person was invariably about living wealth, and one person was invariably about financial wealth, and I helped them understand how they could talk about all wealth together in an integrated way, because ultimately it's all living wealth. So especially when you're dealing with family wealth. And one of the things I discovered was that if you look at all the financial fraud, you can trick a man and you can trick a woman, but it is almost impossible to trick a man and woman working together. And that's why in the family, if you can get the family conspiring together to help each other be successful, particularly between generations and sexes, you will become much more immune to trickery.
That's
much more immune.
That's powerful. It's like, that's the idea of relationships, bringing out the best in each other. But the challenge, and we don't have to get into this that much, but there's trauma and, suppressed emotions. I mean, it's interesting to tie it into suppressed information, but this idea of understanding the root of addictions and dysfunctional behavior has to do with trauma that hasn't been processed, because there's a lesson in that trauma. And like, somebody will be feeling triggered, but instead of learning from the lesson, they'll continue to be triggered, and on one hand, this is kind of, I don't have too strong opinions on this, but when it comes to therapy, think about it. If a therapist can provide a breakthrough session, they don't get that recurring income or check from the person, on one hand.
One of my favorite books to help people with their financial affairs is a book called Family Wealth by James Hughes. And James Hughes, his father had been a lawyer to wealthy families. And he became very interested in how can I help families preserve and nurture and grow their wealth instead of blow their wealth. And what was interesting, so they created a whole technology to help families succeed in this way. And one of the things they discovered is at the root, you needed to help family members be successful at what family members wanted to be successful at, not necessarily making money. A lot of it was helping everybody succeed at their dream, whatever that dream was. Anyway, but what was so fascinating about this book is I became convinced that the technology they were talking about to preserve wealth was the same technology that families who wanted to become wealthy needed. In other words, there wasn't, and it's really teaching people how to conspire together. So whenever I end the Solari Report, I always say, don't worry about whether there is a conspiracy. If you're not in a conspiracy, then you need to start one. And the reason is I grew up in a world where the basis of getting anything accomplished economically or politically was conspiracies. That's what we did.
Let's put a positive spin on conspiracy.
Well, we were trained to be conspiracy generators.
I haven't heard that before.
Right. So I grew up being a conspiracy generator, and I thought conspiracies were great things. You get together, you breathe together, you make a plan, you keep it discreet, and then you implement, and the vast majority of conspiracies were perfectly legal, but we snuck around. We were very secretive. But that's basically the fundamental premise of how you got things done. And when I got booted out of the establishment, to a shock and amazement, what I discovered is friends and families weren't conspiring together. It was almost like they were paralyzed. Conspiracies were bad things. What do you mean? Conspiracies are great things. Robin Hood had a conspiracy. That was great. So it was shocking to me, because to me, that's the fundamental generator of getting things done. So I keep trying to encourage people, for God's sake, start a conspiracy.
I love it because it really inspires me, because sometimes instead of talking about what we're going to do, let's just do it, but on one
exactly.
you don't have to tell anybody about it.
Right.
That's where the secretive part, because time is of the essence. We rather invest our time in making things happen instead of, talking about it or letting other people know about it. So
I find, we always found it fun. There was one guy and I used to always come up with these different conspiracies. It was when I lived in New York, when I was on Wall Street. We'd see somebody doing something bad, something wrong. And so we would start a little conspiracy. It was always just 2 or 3 people, and we'd mess them up. And they never knew who did it. And no one ever knew it was us. It was just fun to mess them up and stop the evildoer from doing it. And we had to keep it totally secret, because otherwise we could, it's very expensive to let an evildoer know that you've messed up their deal.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah. So, so I'm a big believer that if we want to get things done in the world, we have to generate conspiracies, but we need to learn how to be good at it.
Well, I guess what makes somebody good at it? It's about being a team player. I mean, we start expanding.
Right, but let me get back to family wealth. If you're going to be great at building family wealth, then the family needs to proactively know what to do and how to do it way ahead. It's like you need to have a good lawyer before you need him. You need to have a good CPA before you need him. And you need to have the knowledge and infrastructure before you need it. Now, it's very interesting. I remember I had one cousin who got cancer and got himself in trouble because he ran to the wrong people, did the wrong things. And I had another cousin call me up and say, okay, what should he do? And I was lucky. I was able to say, I want you to get these 3 books, call this guy, call this, surgeon, blah, 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 blah. And it was interesting. He trusted me. He believed that I knew, that my list was a good one. He immediately implemented, and he's alive today. But it took me many, many years, including reading the National Health Federation, to discern what were the best books, the best places to go for him in that situation. And I just knew the right people to call who could tell me, go here, go there. So, but that took me years to acquire, and I was lucky because he just assumed I was right. But you need to know all of that before you need it. You can't just walk willy-nilly into the
being prepared.
Right.
If we fail to prepare, then we are prepared to fail. And so I'm going to put the intention out right now that every person who watches this interview,
right,
that they get as much value out of it as I am right now, because I know it's cliche, but the greatest wealth is truly our health. And you're
right,
an example of
right,
that,
right.
and really this is turning into something I wasn't expecting, like a lot of, advantageous things sometimes, but this is really special right now.
Well, the thing that everybody listening to this needs to know is they can do this. I don't care how overwhelming it seems or how, I don't know how to do it. You can do this. Anybody can do this. And, I was one of those people, all I wanted to do was investment banking and finance. I never wanted to learn about health. So God made me learn the hard way, but you can do it. Anybody can do it. And you have to know you can do it. And you have to know, for me, it's prayer. Other people, it's meditation. But if the most valuable healthcare tool you have is to go inside and to listen to yourself and to access the divine intelligence about how you're going to do this.
Wow. Have you heard how prayer is how we communicate with God, and then meditation is just listening? Or, it can be, that's something I share sometimes with people because it's powerful, because the
It's
silence.
prayer is unbelievably powerful, unbelievably powerful. I really believe, one of my favorite, I remember going to a revival and I listened to a sermon, and I love preachers who are very practical, nuts and bolts. And the sermon was all about how you can pray all the time. When you're cleaning the house, you can pray. When you're driving on the interstate, you can pray. I used to drive up to the litigation. It was 14 hours from Tennessee up to Washington, and I would pray the whole time. And, I would leave knowing that my situation was hopeless. I would pray 14 hours up to Washington, and by the time I got there, it wasn't hopeless at all. I had thousands of ideas. The window opened.
Were you always like that, or was there a turning point in your life where you?
No, really, what happened was I went, if you've seen the movie Enemy of the State, you understand what happened to me. Everybody always says she played Will Smith in real life. and I went through a process where everybody and everything turns against you. Everybody and everything. And your situation is totally hopeless because you're up. We had 18 audits and investigations, 12 tracks of litigation, physical harassment. I was poisoned many times. My house was broken into. I was run off the road. I mean, it was unbelievable. So you go from being a very wealthy, very prominent, very successful person with a Rolodex to die for, and then suddenly you're dirt. No one will talk to you. You're persona non grata. Most of your family turns on you. I mean, it's unbelievable to go through these situations. And so, and it went on and on and on and on for many, many years. And it was one of the things when you're dealing with that kind of physical harassment, when people are breaking into your house or trying to run you off the road or following you, there's no one you can call. You can't call the FBI. You can't. I'll never forget. We called. I tried to hire 3 security firms, and they would all come back and say, "We've checked you out. It's too dangerous. We can't help you." Right. So what I knew, I had grown up in an African American neighborhood in Philadelphia, and our family cook was African American, and she really raised me. And I knew the African American community had incredible spiritual technology to deal with violence and genocide. And I'd seen them do it. I grew up watching them do it. And so I went back into that community to a very powerful African American church. And I studied spiritual warfare seriously for 2 years. They had a Bible Institute. I took all these classes, and I just studied spiritual warfare. And they taught me how to deal with spiritual warfare. How do you deal with evil when you have the only weapons you have are spiritual? And it worked. And I only tried it because I'd seen it work for the Black community. I knew I had seen it work, but I didn't really believe it would work for me. But I tried it because there's a Leonard Cohen song that says, only drowning people can see Jesus. But, when you're drowning, you say, okay, well, I'll try this because this is the last thing. It just worked. It was astonishing. And of course, I told you in the process of mapping out the financial ecosystems contiguous to environmental ecosystems, I discovered that Rupert Sheldrake's theories of morphic resonance were absolutely true. They totally explain how the money worked. And the other thing is, if you look at how we were targeted, what the people targeting you try to do is cut you off from the field. If you look at sort of what's going on in current events, they're trying to shut us off from the divine intelligence. They're trying to shut us off from the environment, from the living field, and from the field that we share with each other. So whether the shared intelligence of the plants, the animals, the sun, the beach, the water, They're trying to get us to disconnect from the divine intelligence because they want us to interact with the machine. That's what the vaccines are all about. They want to put it, they want to fill us with nanotechnology, which is brain-machine interface, and they want us resonating with the cell tower instead of with the divine intelligence.
Well, we know this is not going to happen, but it's
right.
because we do live on a planet, there's almost 8 billion of us. And for whatever reason, there's a percentage of the human family that is submitting to this. And I don't think they see the picture like what you see, how this is tied into finance and even like the idea of digital currency
right.
and it being
part of what's happening is the dollar system is long in the tooth. So they're trying to extend the dollar system, but they're trying to accelerate the new system. They don't want the dollar system to collapse before they have the new system. And the problem with the new system is it won't work. I mean, they have a materialist machine vision of the world. And, just like Bill Gates hooked up all of our computers with operating systems with backdoors for the intelligence agencies and used viruses to persuade us to update them regularly. The theory is we can do that with our bodies. We'll put an operating system in 8 billion humans. We use viruses to make them, and government mandates to make them update the operating system every year. And Bill Gates and his syndicate will become the wealthiest people in the history of the planet, right? That's the vision. The vision can't work because it's so oversimplistic and it's so machine-like, and that's not life. And ultimately, people want to be free. Intelligence wants to be free. Mm-hmm. But, I don't underestimate their ability to kill a couple billion people before they fail. And that's why I think it's very important for us to bring transparency to what's happening and try and do something about it. Because, to a certain extent, we have to save Bill Gates from himself.
Have you heard of Robert David Steele and open source intelligence, open source engineering? Have you heard about that?
I know about it. It's not, he's not somebody that I work with.
Okay. It just kind of came to mind because it's this idea of like open source and then...
I think the idea of open source intelligence is a very good idea.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a great believer if we all would just put our individual pieces of the jigsaw puzzle on the table, that we'll be able to figure it out. Walt Whitman has this wonderful poem from the Song of Myself about, we take information from all sides and then suddenly, but we each have to contribute. We each are responsible to establish our truth. But I think to me, shared intelligence is the way to we want to be a society that has the highest learning metabolism. And that's why all this secrecy and suppression is so negative, because it slows down the learning metabolism. We're all deeply dependent on all the learning of our ancestors and all the learning of each other. That's what makes us intelligent. And, I think it's very hard for many people to face the fact that we're a remarkably primitive civilization. But if we can evolve to a much more enlightened civilization, I don't mean to sound greedy, but the wealth potential is enormous. Yeah, it's enormous, including, stopping the environmental damage, because the way we're operating on this planet environmentally is not okay.
Well, this might be oversimplified, but the cure to suppression of knowledge is to expose it, right? Kind of. I mean, on one hand, there's opportunity. What's been in the shadows is somewhat being disinfected with sunlight, or it's being exposed, kind of. So there's a lesson here for us collectively, for us to become enlightened, where we have to learn, like from.
So I think part of turning on the lights, though, is healing.
Yep.
Because when you turn on the lights, a lot of what's going to come out is very frightening and very shocking. And there are tremendous numbers of what I would describe as satanic and occult practices going on. And here's the reality: if divine intelligence is going to prevail, that kind of those kind of practices have to stop because they include in human behavior, whether it's war, whether it's organized crime, whether it's, there's some pretty ugly things going on. And we're going to have to, it's going to have to end, and we're going to have to heal from that. And people are going to have to be held responsible. We've had, just in the US government, whether it's the bailouts or the crazy stimulus package or the 21 trillion missing, we've had a financial coup d'etat of $60 trillion. I mean, that's how rich we are, is that you can pull 60 trillion out and we're still functioning. It's quite miraculous.
Wow. What's coming to my mind right now, what do you tell somebody that is into like saving money when the government keeps printing money, kind of, or like the idea of purchasing power is going down? Or
because I would absolutely save money. I think it's very important to, even if the whole planet is being run irresponsibly, I need to be responsible for myself. But what you need to focus on is acquiring real assets and real assets that create wealth. So, productivity is investing things. And I was just talking to you about the moringa tree, which I was very interested in because you're involved in the moringa tree. I've always been very interested in them but that's an example of because the earth and the harvest every year is the gift that keeps on giving. And any crop that is really productive and fast growing, it's a miracle. Well, it's just like this huge bounty that the earth gives us every year. And the more we appreciate it and take care of it, the wealthier we become. Now, one way of looking at the gross national product is it's really a multiple of the harvest, right? Of what we take from the earth. So, so a moringa business is a perfect example of a business that has tremendous potential to just create wealth, so that 1 and 1 really can equal 3, because you found a way to interact with nature that is very life-giving.
Well, my whole story is just beautiful because I feel like I was guided. Like I would be driving and I would get, in Hawaii, we call them chicken bumps, goosebumps. And I'd look out the window and there's a moringa tree, and I just kept having it happen over and over. And when I started my business, it was harvesting leaves from a tree I grew from seed. But then when I started learning about laws, I'm like, okay, I started getting restaurants interested, and, so then I started realizing, okay, I need to like partner, and I need to work with like an FDA registered facility, if I want to start scaling things up. And that's exactly what I've been doing. But some knowledge like I can talk about is how moringa is so fast growing because it contains the highest concentration of zeatin. Zeatin is a phytonutrient which is responsible for vegetative growth. And it also has anti-aging properties. So that's why with moringa cultivation for leaf production, the trees never really develop bark. They're grown kind of like a hedge, and there can be a foot of growth in 1 week just from what's called coppice.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah. And it's
when I first learned about it, the guy who taught me about it, he was a real estate developer who was organizing this community around moringa trees. And he was a very high integrity guy. But when he kept telling me how fast they grow, I couldn't believe it. It's like, how could this be and me not know about this? It was amazing. So, yeah.
Technically, they're kind of like a short-lived tree, but there's actually 13 species in the moringa genus. So what we're talking about is Moringa oleifera, which is from India, but there's other species from Africa. So when we go up the chain a little bit, they are kind of related to like a baobab, some of those African trees that don't need like much water, that can be very drought tolerant. So that's why moringa has a nickname of the never die tree and the miracle tree, because of the fact that like it is a miracle. And I'm so passionate about it because people a lot smarter than me have given it the nickname that it's the #1 humanitarian plant, that if scientists were to design a plant for maximum benefit to humanity, that there couldn't be a tree better than moringa. So it's that idea, because it's interesting, because when we think about innovation, sometimes we think like, oh, technology, but it's like,
no,
it's already here, and to work with it. And that's why I'm really interested in raising standards of quality when it comes to the farming practices, and making sure that we really are
Right.
taking care of the earth. And a tree like moringa doesn't really require much inputs. And then another thing is you can use the leaves of moringa as a fertilizer as well, because of the zinc
Right.
in it and the nutrients in it. So there's just so many uses to it. And like I shared earlier, the seeds can turn sewage into drinking water. So literally 4 moringa seeds can transform
Right.
a liter of sewage into safe drinking
Wow.
water, and that's like the formula, because it gets into turbidity of water. Turbidity gets into how much contaminants are in the water. So if there's average turbidity, you only need 1 moringa seed. But sewage, you would need 4. But I could go on and on, but there's another species
It's
called...
interesting. Well, this week on the Solari Report, every week we have an interview, but then we have a movie. So the movie, which I was watching last Friday night, was Water, the Great Mystery. I've seen it before, but I watched it again, and water is just miraculous. And then I had bought it, but I hadn't watched it for a while. So right afterwards, I watched the Fantastic Fungi, the movie about pulse stomachs and mushrooms. So between sort of an hour and 50 minutes of the magic of water and then another 2 hours of the magic of mushrooms, I remember I shut down. I had great dreams Friday night. I was thinking, this planet is just amazing.
Have you met Paul by any chance?
No. I might have been at a conference where he was, but many, many years ago, but I haven't met him. At one point, I went to his website and just got all the books. I said, I've got to have all these books. And I thought a while, my great-grandfather had been a mushroom farmer in Pennsylvania.
Oh, what?
And I have a property with a couple farms around me in Tennessee. And we were thinking, could we grow mushrooms here? I thought, well, it's in the family. So I went and got all those books. But
cool.
There's one story I wanted to tell you before we close.
Okay.
And it goes back to this, I think part of the insanity that we're watching right now, because it's really psychopathy. The news system is basically, they're planning on ending currencies as we know them and going to a slavery system where you get a credit on the company store. That's what crypto is. It's something, it's a financial transaction where you are physically controlled from a central point. And they can cut off your money like that. I mean, there's no freedom. It's a slavery system. And it's psychopathic. And it's what happens when a model like what Sheldrake was describing in the Rebirth of Nature, wonderful discussion that he just published. You have this scientific and economic model of the machine, and the human is a machine, and the economy is a machine, and the earth is a machine. And it's completely at odds with fundamental reality and where the real power of life to create wealth comes from. And I think this is the last gasp of the machine model to try and keep itself going, literally by composting millions of people and destroying. You're talking about depopulation in a serious way, to basically keep the top layer subsidized. I don't think it's going to work because it's that nuts. But to understand how to reject it, you need to understand, okay, how do we build a model that reflects living reality, reflects the divine intelligence? So I want to tell you this story because it's such a great segue into real solutions. So I was in the city of London at an investment conference, and an investment manager got up to give a speech, and he told this story. And the story just knocked me out. It was about the psychoanalyst Jung in Switzerland. And for years, I had a couple clients who were big Jung lovers, and it took them years, but they finally found the story. And it's up on my website. If you do a search, it's the title of the post is "Karma Means You Don't Get Away with Anything." Okay, so that was the name of the story at the website if you want to find it. Anyway, so a woman came to see Jung, and she was dressed clearly from the upper echelons of society. And she told Jung, I'm not going to give you my name because I'm only coming once. I'm never coming again. And her theory was she believed if she told Jung her story, it would be like a confession, and she could clear it and solve her problem by telling him the story. So here was her story. As a young woman, she was from a very prominent, wealthy family. She had gone to medical school, become a doctor, and then she had fallen in love with her best friend's husband. And her best friend's husband, and she couldn't reconcile the tension. And so, being a doctor, she knew how to do it. She murdered her best friend. Presumably, I'm assuming she poisoned her, and proceeded promptly after her friend died to marry the husband. She got pregnant, had a child. Right after she got pregnant, everything started to go wrong. So she was an accomplished horseman woman. All her horses would buck and rear, and she had to give up riding. She had beautiful wolfhounds. They all died. Right before, I think before her child was born, or right after her husband died. So she lost her horses, she lost her wolfhound, she lost her husband. Her daughter hated her, and as soon as she was old enough to run away, she left and ran off. And so when she came to Jung, she said to Jung, wherever she was, the birds would stop singing. She said the birds knew. So what she was implying was that at some level of reality, there's no secrets, and there is energetic responsibility. And what I try and tell everybody in the United States who comes to me and says, how do I get the economy working in my community? And I said, your first problem is that the birds know. So energetically, you have to clear the field. And that's one of the reasons you need to bring transparency to what's happening, because the birds know. And until you clear it and heal it and turn it around, it's not gonna get better. And it's a little bit like what I told you when we were talking before we started to interview. We have to address the Beck brothers in every community in America. What are we going to do about the Beck brothers? The Beck brothers being the characters in Yellowstone who are traumatizing and bullying the neighborhood.
Speak truth to power and be courageous.
Yeah. And you need a critical mass of people to do that.
Well, with regards to solutions, thanks for sharing that story. I resonate with it. As a gardener, there's a whole thing. I'm really into compost teas. And one of my mentors taught me to listen to the birds because the plants somehow energetically work with the birds, and their stomatas open, usually in sync with birds singing. So I've produced some incredible results for clients of mine with compost tea. I've rejuvenated trees that weren't making fruit or flowers for them through tuning into the birds and energetically trying to, raise the energy. And so, yeah, I'm no expert in this, and I don't try to ever, I really hope nobody thinks any of this is woo-woo, because I feel like this is hard science, because with the National Health Federation.
So what I would say is, if we're going to succeed at what we have to do, we need all of creation helping.
Exactly.
Right.
Have you seen, I guess just to end it, have you done any bird watching recently? Because I'm so happy I'm able to visit my favorite island here and enjoy the birds.
Yeah, so I'm staying in an area in the Netherlands where the birds are fantastic.
Good.
So they're everywhere.
I'm happy.
And do you know what the Ilsemeer is in the Netherlands? It's a bay that was shut off and diked by the Dutch, and so now it's fresh. It's a huge freshwater lake, but when you're walking along the beach, it feels like the ocean. It's called the Ilsemeer. Anyway, and I was walking along the Ilsemeer about 2 weeks ago, and this huge flock of starlings, looking like birds. I don't know for a fact they were starlings, but they looked like starlings. They started doing figure eights over my head. It was incredible. And this went on for like 10 minutes. And it was one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. So, and when you walk along, there are cranes and incredible ducks and swans, and I mean, it's full of wildlife. And of course, in the spring, all the sheep are having lambs, all the horses are having foals, and so you have, thousands and thousands of tiny lambs and foals and baby ducklings all, they're like, we're here, it's great, we've arrived. It's very fun.
Good. I just wanted to make sure all your health, freedom, liberties, you've been enjoying them and enjoying the birds. And
right.
Here in the United States, there are some states where people are under lockdown and people are being arrested, and they don't necessarily, here in Florida, I know we're about to wrap this up, but in where I live, Pinellas County, we actually had a business owner arrested. From my understanding, he's the only business owner that was arrested in the state. And the governor or attorney general did not back our commissioners and the sheriff department here. So that whole case was dropped. And so I was keeping.
So the most important question in the November election, you need to ask, who's your sheriff?
Yeah, well, thanks to Scott, I know that the county coroner has authority in some jurisdictions to actually arrest the sheriff.
Really?
Yeah, so
I did not know that.
I shared that with me because we were talking all about our campaign, the Rally Congress, and it was challenging, but it was an opportunity, because I was working on getting my public servants around here to sign the pledge, and Scott mentioned the sheriff and, but it's like social distancing and, them trying to, bring up the whole, because they created like the emergency order, which basically is unconstitutional, but a lot of people, due to wanting to respect.
So one of the wonderful things about what I do is I have wonderful sources. In our subscriber base, we have fabulous doctors, nurses, scientists who are constantly sending the best of the best. And then I get to post them and watch them. And so I realize, I've been getting incredible information from all around the world throughout this period, and really feeling very confident that I have, I may not have an intelligence agency level intelligence, but I have awfully great sort of intelligence. And so I've been able to go through this period with remarkably less stress than people who don't have that.
Good.
So,
I'm happy. I'm happy to hear that. Well, just in the interest of time, it's been a complete pleasure and honor. So thank you so much for the gift of your time.
And please give my best to Scott and everybody at NHF. And sincerely, I always encourage our subscribers, join, get the magazine, get the benefits of the network, but also support the work you're doing on Codex. We've had Scott on to talk about Codex. These are people who are out there fighting in the trenches to protect you. And, NHF has done an awful lot for all of us. And frankly, if you look at how difficult that stuff is to deal with, we once got out there dealing with it. We don't want it in our front door.
Thank you for that shout out. So yeah, anybody watching this, if you haven't subscribed, please do hit that notification bell and then head right on over to the Solari Report YouTube.
How much does it cost to become an NHF member? It's not that expensive.
It's $45, I believe.
And it's nhf.org is your website?
TheNHF.com.
TheNHF.com.
And we're starting to blow up the YouTube channel. And pretty soon, I would love to have you on again, and we could actually possibly have it live. So there's a way with Zoom where we can have it go through multiple outlets. So we might be able to have it go through like your YouTube channel, our YouTube channel, like simultaneously. And then
that'd be great. That'd be great.
But we've been trying to just, build this up because, I feel like I'm a confident host, but this is maybe my fifth interview under my belt. So there's people that have a lot more experience than I do. So I've been trying to, just get more experience under my belt before I start doing the live streams and everything. Right. That's kind of the plan. You give a little upfront notification to be like, hey, we're going to go live
Yeah, and the nice thing
tomorrow.
about that is you can get a lot of great questions.
Well, that's the point, yeah, and to have
Right.
some of the questions addressed, while we're live and all of that. So yeah, this has really been incredible. And as soon as we get off, I know this is just
Okay.
gonna,
So give my best to Scott. Don't forget, and everybody in NHF. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Catherine. All right, thanks everybody for watching.